I would like to take a moment before we get into today's main episode and to talk about my sponsor for the podcast. Podmatch is a new podcasting site dedicated to all podcasters. The platform helps hosts get connected with potential guests to appear on their show, as well as allow guests to find podcasts that will give them a chance to share their story. Podmatch offers many tools to help organize your page, from to-do lists to episode planning to potentially appearing on a leaderboard. Podmatch has it all. The best part, you have the potential to get paid. And who doesn't like to get paid from home? I like to. With an easy sign up, you can start connecting with podcasters and guests immediately. I have been a part of Podmatch since the beginning of May, and I have got to say that it was the best decision I've ever made because Podmatch helps your podcast grow. It helps you get connected with people that have very interesting, very compelling background stories that are just waiting for their story to be shared. So if you are a host or guest and would like to start building professional relationships, explore more opportunities, and have your story shared, I highly suggest that you sign up with Podmatch today by going to joinpodmatch.com/lethal venom to start expanding your network in seconds. I would like to give another huge thank you to Podmatch for sponsoring this episode. Now on to our main episode, and again, you can sign up at joinpodmatch.com/lethal venom to begin your podcasting journey today. Hello everyone, welcome to the Lethal Venom Podcast, the show where I talk about anything I want with the honest to God truth, no lies told. Today I'm joined by Mr. Dave Mowry. He is a comics telling his story of living with severe mental illness one joke at a time. He also teaches stand-up comedy to folks with a mental illness, helping them find humor in their dark days and lost years, thus transforming lives. He is the best-selling author of the Oh My OMG That's Me mental health books, which have sold over 17,000 copies, as well as a blogger with over 1 million reads, as well as a comic who has shattered stigma one joke at a time. Dave has overcome hospitalization and homelessness, and he's here today to share his story of resilience to help others know they are not alone and that healing is possible. So, Dave, thank you so much for coming on. I cannot wait to hear your story and just have you on the show to share the truth.
Good to be here, Noah. Thanks for having me.
So, I guess for starters, start from the beginning of kind of how your journey began.
I think the short version is that had some successful businesses. Things were good. It seems like, I remember my wife when I was sitting out on a deck on vacation and saying, we made it. Um, it was good. And it was less than a year later than I was knocked down by my undiagnosed bipolar disorder, and we lost everything. We lost everything, and we were a couple $100,000 in debt on top of that. And so that started my 14 lost years, my dark days, and then the slow evolution into becoming whole and fully functioning and just a productive life and working our way back, back to a good spot. And like you said, I was homeless with the family for 18 months. I look back at those times and, I'm sure we can talk about it, but those are the hard times, the difficult times, the really challenging times from going from being, happy and positive to just going to the complete bottom, just hitting bottom.
When you first got diagnosed with bipolar, was it something that you had known prior to that, or was this kind of a 180 shock when you got diagnosed with it?
It was new. I didn't know anything about it. So when I got diagnosed, it was a revelation, but it was actually a positive thing for me because I could say Yeah, that's what it is. Before that, I mean, I didn't know what was happening in my head. I had my ups and downs. I knew I had my ups and downs, deep depression, and then going into feeling good. But when I was feeling good, I thought, that's great. I'm just back to normal. Little did I know that I was manic and doing manic things. And one example is at Christmas. One year at Christmas, I sold one of my businesses and had some cash. And I came home and I decorated the Christmas tree with $10,000 and $100 bills. And I thought that was really cool. And I called my wife and my kids in to take a look, and they looked at me like I was crazy. And yeah, I was. So getting diagnosed, it was a relief. It was a relief to say, okay, this is what's happening. And I could, at that point, I could start dealing with it.
What was your family's reaction? How do you tell your kids that dad has bipolar disorder? Did you did you try to tell them in kind of a way for them not to worry about their father, or were you just kind of honest and said, "Yes, I have bipolar disorder. This is how I'm going to be some days." How do you really kind of mention that to your kids?
Yeah, it's challenging. My kids were 8 and 10 at the time, so it wasn't really, I mean, the word bipolar didn't mean anything to them. Depressed, I mean, they didn't know. But before my breakdown, I was real involved with them. We'd play, I'd get home, and it was a fun time, and we'd do a lot of things together. And then after I had my breakdown, and I was severely depressed. I mean, it was everything I could do just to get out of bed and make it down to the couch. And so I wasn't available to play. I wasn't available for like I was before. And so, they could see that. And we talked about it as just me not feeling well, me. We didn't talk in detail because they were too young to really understand it. And being, I talk about now. I look back, and my life, especially then, my whole life's been challenging and lots of ups and downs. And I look at, the depression, and I have regrets for the things that I couldn't do or didn't do. And then I look at the mania and I say my regrets are for the things that I did do. The when I was in the grips of mania, the things I did do. But then when I look and I think of the kids and the impact that it had on the family and the kids, that's when the tears come. Um, you know, that's when the tears come. I was thinking about the impact that this had on the kids.
So tell me a little bit more about what led to you being homeless, and what did you do in that moment when you found out that you were on the verge of becoming homeless?
Yeah, my wife, when I had my breakdown, my wife stepped up and started doing the finances and some of the other things, and it just became clear that we had no income, and so it just became clear that we weren't going to be able to stay in our house. It was clear to her I was just not functioning really, and she came to me and said, we can't stay here, and we can't afford anywhere anything. And she talked to some friends who took us in for a while, and we lived in their basement. There was, it was just a basement, and we had a hot plate. We ate a lot of spaghetti, and we were also homeless in our car. For me, it was, I don't know. I was so low. It was just another thing that was happening. It was just another thing. And again, the guilt and the anxiety was overwhelming. And what do you tell your kids when, hey, we've got to move, and we aren't going to have any place to live? And in the basement, the kids slept in an alcove they slept on air mattresses in an alcove under the stairs. Uh, and that was that was their space. Um, so yeah.
What was the turning point of the moment that made you say, I can't really live like this. I don't want my kids to live like this. What was kind of the next steps that you took to where you wanted to change your life?
Well, I wanted to change it from the beginning. When I fell into the depression and couldn't get out of the bed, or if I did get out of bed, it was everything I could do to get down to the couch and just sit and just be, and just to hold it together. And even at that point, I was trying. I was trying to be okay. I was trying to break out of the depression. I was trying. So there was no particular point of saying, I want to change my life. It wasn't a decision for me to, it wasn't like drinking or drugs or things like that. It was not a decision or bad decisions that I made that caused the challenges. One of the things that I just kept trying, and I kept failing. I kept trying and kept failing and kept trying, and every time that I tried and failed, um, it took me. I mean, it took me into that depression and those dark times, and made it really hard. But uh, so it was 14 years really between the time that I had the breakdown and started with the depression and the anxiety and the overwhelm, not being able to work and not being able to function. So it was 14 years. And during those 14 years, I gradually got better, I think. But it wasn't until 2010, I, like I said, I got it before that. I don't know what year, but I applied for a job, got a job at Starbucks as a manager, and I made it 3 weeks before I was just overwhelming depression and anxiety, and I just couldn't do it. But in 2010, I kept trying to work. In 2010, I got a job at Macy's in downtown Portland, and minimum wage, 12 hours a week, and riding the bus, and uh, I was able to do it, and I just kept going. Even on the hard days, I kept going. So, I made it for a year working there, and that was the point where I was able to work. And then in 2011, I got another job in mental health, helping other people with mental health challenges. And that was truly the turning point for me.
Which I found the most interesting thing during this is that you actually turned to stand-up comedy was a way that you kind of really was able to kind of cope with what everything that you were going with. It tell me a little bit about how comedy really helped you with your mental health journey and kind of how it really changed your life for the better.
Yeah, I I had my job. I had a job at the mental health, a small mental health nonprofit, and I worked part time. But I worked, and for me, it was, my mental illness, my challenges where I was able to help other people, and that helped. But I was hospitalized prior to that, and when I was going through my dark days, I was hospitalized. And when I was in the hospital, I came up with a couple jokes, and they were just simple, kind of dumb jokes. And one of them was why do they keep the doors locked to the psychiatric unit? And the answer is because there's so many people trying to get in. So I thought that was pretty funny. And so this stand-up comic who teaches mental stand-up comedy to folks with a mental illness, he came and to teach a class, and I saw him and listened to him, and I thought, I'm that funny. And so I took the class, and turns out that I had talent for writing jokes. I had a knack for writing jokes. I had a knack for telling jokes and timing and things like that. And I ended up writing a lot of jokes for myself and jokes for other people. But what happened was I would have PTSD. I'd be driving down the road and a song would come on the radio, and it would remind me of some events, and I'd have just have a panic attack right then and there. And what the stand-up comedy, learning the comedy did was when I was driving down the road and I had heard that song and I had that memory of that experience, instead of going into that panic attack, I'd say, where can I find the humor in that? And it changed everything. It just changed everything. I started looking for the humor in my challenges, and then performing. And, other people like my jokes too. So I was able to tell my story one joke at a time. And I'll share some of those with you. But I was able to tell my story one joke at a time and help shatter stigma at the same time. And um, really, it was huge for my healing. It just changed the processes in my mind, changed the pathways in my brain from going to this dark spot when I had these thoughts to going through where can I find the humor, and then looking for humor and writing jokes about those experiences. So that's how the stand-up comedy came about. I mean, there's no way anybody could have ever figured out that that would be really a turning point in my life.
One thing that I really like about comedy is that you don't have to be unserious about things all the time. You can really talk about some really personal stuff that you've been through and make it funny to where it's lighthearted. I try to do the same thing with mine. I remember when I've done group therapy, I usually try to make my story humorous and a joking matter about it. Which some people might say, well, I don't see anything funny with someone that's cutting themselves or cutting their arm or anything like that. But to the person saying maybe it's their way of trying to bring light to the situation of making it not such a heavy topic to really discuss with the group. And I tended to be like that with my mental health. I always kind of joked about it and everything. And some people kind of gave questionable looks, but some people laughed too. I don't know if it was uncomfortable laughter, but it was laughter at some points. Um, One thing though that I really find really interesting is not only do you do stand-up comedy, but you actually teach it as well. And people listening probably have this interest and vision about when you talk about teaching stand-up comedy to folks that not only to regular folks, but the people that have a mental health illness, including like the chronically and criminally insane. What is it really like to teach stand-up comedy to people with mental health, with a mental health illness, whether it's just very brief or it's very light to very severe cases? Describe the process about what it's like teaching that to mental health
Yeah,
patients.
sure. And people have a perception of people with mental illness being incapable of functioning, or,
Mhm.
you know, people on the street that they see, or things like that. And most people with mental illness are just regular folks like,
Yep.
you and me. And, um, but we, starting in the class, I have people tell a little bit about their story. And so it starts out with them being totally open and honest about their story. And then we go from there into a second class where um, we start looking for the humor in their experiences. And it's extremely healing. Uh, it's just extremely healing. People haven't thought about looking for the humor in their hard times. It's not something that they've thought about. So, we start looking for the humor, and what I can do is I can spot the places, I can spot where there's potential for the humor. And then we write a joke and we work through it, and they start telling their joke. And it changes everything. I mean, if like with me, if it was a song on the radio that took me back to, being just my anxiety was overwhelming, and things. So I'd go to that place. Well, same thing happened with other people. They'd go to their instead of going to their dark place, they'd look for the humor in their experiences, and it was transformative. I mean, it transforms lives. Um, and I think, I talk about Molly. Molly was in the class, and Molly was a doctor, and all she wanted to do was be a doctor. And then she lost everything because of her bipolar disorder. And she came to the class, and instead of after taking the class, uh, instead of her thinking and believing or feeling that she was a failed doctor, she saw herself as a comic and started performing around town and doing open mics. And so it gave her a new identity. And she's hilarious. She tells her jokes, and they're just laugh out loud funny. That's the other thing about the comedy class and the jokes. They're laugh out loud funny. We don't chase jokes that don't have the potential to be a laugh out loud funny. So everybody, we find humor in everybody's experiences. And then the jokes are clever and intelligent and, laugh out loud funny.
You kind of mentioned earlier about when you do the stand-up comedy, some of the stories you have told to the crowd. What stories do you typically share with the audience that really resonates with them the most?
Uh, there's one about anxiety. And it goes like this. When you're anxious, you have, racing thoughts, and it just goes on and on and on. And at least that's what it was for me. The anxiety was overwhelming, and I couldn't stop the thoughts, and I just had negative thoughts just going, going, and going. So the joke goes like this. One day, well, I when I was over time, I gained weight. I gained about 30 pounds. So I decided to do something about it. So I started going to the gym and started working out, started doing the treadmill. And then the other day I was on the treadmill, and the guy next to me looked over and he said, "You're not going very fast." I said, "That's okay. My mind's racing." So there's the joke that takes my experiences with the anxiety and the mind racing and turns it into humor. That's one of the favorites when I'm performing. I also a joke about um, dating service for people with mental illness. I think there should be a dating service for people with mental illness because, well, I can see the postings now. Paranoid white female thinks paranoid white male. with no government connections, or paranoid male seeks paranoid female for to share compound in Idaho, or my favorite, dual personality female seeks dual personality male for double dates.
I think what it's really unique about it is a play on words, and I think it's real clever that you use play on words to make the joke stick and to really um resonate with people. Um, but one of these stories that I find kind of the most interesting is you talk about sitting on a park bench with a gun in your hand, and today you say that it's your favorite joke is the one that you tell about suicide. What is it about that story that makes it your favorite to share?
Couple things. One is it's edgy. You can't make jokes about suicide, right? It's so serious, and so it kind of breaks some new ground. So I like that aspect of it. And the other thing is that when I tell the joke, the people in the audience don't quite know, uh, they don't know where it's going. And so there's a beat before they realize it's okay to laugh. And then it's the joke that tends to get the most laughs. So the joke goes like this. I was suicidal. I did sit on that bench with the gun, and I didn't pull the trigger, and I'm not quite sure why, but I didn't. But and that's the other thing about the jokes is, they're all based in reality. All good jokes are based in reality. You don't just make them up. And the first part generally is the real portion, and then the creative part is punchline. But my suicide joke is one time when things were really bad, I decided to end it all. So I went upstairs in the bathroom and I took a bunch of pills. Afterwards, I called my wife for help. She said there are more pills under the sink.
Damn, that's a dark one.
I know.
That's a dark one.
I know. And the people in the crowd, it's like there's a beat before they realize that they can laugh about suicide joke. And then they just laugh and laugh. And afterwards, people come up to me and say, I thought about suicide, and it's really nice for somebody to be able to talk about it without it being depressing and sad. And I've had parents come up to me and talk to me about their adult children who have attempted suicide or have suicide ideation. And they talk about the relief that it is for them to hear a joke and to take it so that they don't have to live with the seriousness of it every day. So it really is a favorite of the crowd. And I like it because it is a bit dark. It is edgy. Suicide's never funny, except when it is. I don't know anybody else that can tell a suicide joke, and it's a gentle suicide joke. It doesn't have anything to do with guns or attempts, serious or anything. And my wife is very helpful. There's more pills under the sink, so I know.
You know,
I know.
when you tell jokes like that, some people tend to really prosper and, grasp it. And, some people you've had have come up to you and say, I appreciate you so much for talking about it. Have you had moments where you've had people actually disagree with how you approach these topics? Have you ever had any negative responses from doing the stand up where it's talking about really serious issues? Because people do tend to get offended over everything. I'm just kind of curious on if you've ever had people get offended with some of the material that you've talked about and discussed in your set.
Yeah, and I'll preface this by saying that, people with mental illness, with mental health challenges, we're not fragile. We can hear a joke about mental illness and we can laugh about it. Oftentimes, when I'm in a group and it's a group of folks with mental illness, mental health challenges, uh, it evolves to humor just naturally. We talk about the times we were crazy, and there was a period where I was like when I decorated a Christmas tree with $10,000 and $100 bills. I was, I mean, I look at that and I was crazy. And then people talk about their experiences being crazy, and there is a there, I don't know if it's recent, but some people get offended by the word crazy or say we shouldn't say this or we shouldn't say that because it might trigger somebody with a mental illness. And that's exactly the opposite, because we're strong, we're capable, we're able. And the people that tend to think that way are people in the helping profession, people that think we need to be saved. And that's the worst kind of ableism. But of all the shows that I've done, of all the performances and all the performers, there's only been one person that came up afterwards. And it was somebody it was a counselor. And she said that, it's probably not a good idea to talk about suicide, to tell a joke about suicide because somebody might get triggered by it. And nobody with a mental health challenge, I mean, they laugh the hardest, and parents and loved ones laugh just as hard. Uh, and it's the people from the caring professions. If there's anybody that gets offended, they're people that are trying to protect us, and we don't need protected.
What's the biggest misconception people tend to have when it comes to people that are diagnosed with mental health disorders? What seems to be a misconception everyone gets wrong?
I think one, that we're fragile. Two, we're dangerous. Um, Three, maybe just one and two. Those are the big ones. There's just so much misunderstanding about it. There's so much stigma. I remember when my kids were young and I was first diagnosed, my wife told some people, and other kids would come over to our house and play. And my wife told some people, and they stopped letting their kids come over to our house and play with our kids because, I had bipolar disorder. So there was it wasn't safe. They didn't think it was safe. So I think those are the big misconceptions. A misconception, the third one, I think, is that we need to be taken care of, and we don't. We're just not fragile. We're capable, we're able. And, we see people on the street that really need help and really, really, really need help. And sometimes people see that, they think of that when they think of mental illness. You mentioned that I taught the stand-up comedy down at I'm in Oregon, and at the Oregon State Hospital and I taught a class for folks that were in there for, except for insanity. So, the criminally insane. And, they were just as sane as anybody else. The perception, I don't know what the perception is, but it's a misperception. They were regular people and they were funny and they had the same concerns and issues that anybody else would. They just happened to make a mistake. And one of the mistakes that some of the folks made was pleading insanity because the crime that they were charged with, if they were found guilty, they would have spent 2 years in prison. And going to the Oregon State Hospital, they couldn't get out. So they'd been there for 4 years or 5 years. And uh, the they just couldn't get out. The parole board, or psychiatric security review board, was very cautious, so these people just couldn't get out. So that's one of the challenges that they had. They didn't. Some people pled insanity because they thought it was a good idea. Their lawyers said they should do it. Others needed to be in there, but yeah, just regular folks and laugh out loud funny. What's one? One joke I wrote. This guy that was in there, he was just obsessed with suicide. He couldn't stop thinking about suicide. And he was in there because he committed a white collar crime, but he couldn't stop about thinking about suicide. So we wrote another suicide joke for him, and it's uh, he he realized that he was getting better when he envisioned himself jumping on off a Golden Gate Bridge, and he was wearing a floaty. So he had a floaty, and that was an improvement over just jumping in and trying to kill yourself. So he's halfway home.
I think it's when you're jokes like that that really help people at ease a little bit about that it's open about it and you can talk about it. Um, but I think one way that people have really felt relatable to it has been the OMG That's Me series. Tell me a little bit about how these kind of stories from these books have helped further promoted this analogy or have helped brought this or have brought this topic up for conversation.
Yeah, I think, you mentioned the blogging, and I blog for bbhope.com. Over 1 million people read the blogs. And when I blogged, I told my story 600 to 800 words at a time. It was just completely open and honest and raw. And people read these. There were so many blog posts with three ways to do this, or 7 steps to sin, just that type of thing. And mine were different because they were telling a story. And I talked about a story about about pretending to be okay. Or one of the, I told the story of not knowing which me was going to wake up in the morning, the depressed me or the manic me, or the other stories that. And can I tell you a joke in the middle of this? I just thought of a joke, one of my favorite jokes, when over time I finally figured out how to tell if I was depressed or manic, because I knew I was depressed when I woke up in the morning and it was everything I could do to get out of bed. And I knew I was manic when I spent all day trying to get my wife into bed. I know, I know. So, I think, the stories that I told were honest from the heart, completely open, just like you're talking about the truth, unvarnished truth. And so people read it, and the most common comment was, "OMG, that's me. You're telling my story. I don't feel so alone now." And people related to it. So I took the best of those blog posts and put them in my book. And people read the book and shared the book, and family members would share the book. Um, and the feedback, the comments. And like, I've sold over 17,000 copies, and there's over, I think, a thousand reviews now, and um, it's people that are they are just, you're telling that, I'm telling their story. My story is their story. Not there were weeks and weeks and weeks. There was, when I was severely depressed, I'd sleep in my clothes because it was too much just to take them off at night. and put them on in the morning. So I'd sleep in my clothes, and I'd sleep in my clothes for weeks, and I wouldn't shower for weeks and weeks and weeks. And I wrote about that in one of the blog posts, and it's in the book. And people said, that's me. I can't take a shower. I just can't. It's overwhelming. And I can't shower. And this goes on for weeks and weeks. And so people relating to that and helping to shatter the stigma as well, because reading it's what it's truly like. If somebody wants to know what it's truly like to live with a mental illness, OMG, that's me, it's for them. If somebody lives with a mental illness and they want to know they're not alone, then OMG, that's me is the book for them. I wish that every psychiatrist, psychologist, counselor would read it, because they get their training, they get it from books, they get it from lectures. But to read this and to really understand what it's like to live with a mental illness, I think that would help with their counseling and their therapy and really understanding their patients and the people they're working with. And then the other book, OMG, That's Me 3, is the story about the transformation of 6 people and the transformation that happened to them through learning and performing stand-up comedy. Uh, and the transformations are amazing. Molly's in there. She's chapter 6. Other people are in there. And the audiobook is really cool because we we were able to splice in some of the live show. So them telling jokes live on stage and the audience reaction. So the audiobook is just it's just really great. So if somebody is interested in listening to an uplifting and positive and funny um, audiobook, and one that will help shatter the stigma around mental illness, then OMG, That's Me 3 is the one for them.
What's some of the what's one big tip of advice you would give to someone that's suffering from mental health that wants to find something that they can do to help them escape from it? What advice do you have for those people?
First, it took me years and years and years to accept the fact that I had a mental illness. Uh, I remember riding the bus downtown to my job at Macy's and looking at other people on the bus and thinking, that's not me. Or being in another place with counselors or whatever, and other people with mental illness, and thinking, that's not me. And I think finally I accepted the fact that I had a mental illness. So I think accepting the fact that one has a mental illness and that's just how it is, and it's okay, and that it's not the end of the world, because there is hope and there is hope. And the other thing, a couple other things. One is to just keep trying, no matter how many times you fail, how bad it gets. Uh, I say it's, acceptance without resignation. You accept the fact that you live with a mental illness, but not resigned to the fact that it's always going to be the way it is right now. Um, and I think some of the other things, just little things that worked for me when I was really down, and it was everything I could do, get down on the couch or get downstairs, I'd sit in a different chair. And just the fact that I sat in a different chair was me trying to make a difference, trying for things to be different. And the other thing I would say is watch the cooking channel. I would watch the cooking channel, and I would be sitting there and I would be doing something without doing anything. And by watching the cooking channel, I was learning different things, like what spice goes with what and what different things. So I was able to sit on the couch and watch the cooking channel and get out of my head. And it's so great when we are able to get out of our head, because with depression and with mania, that's where we are. We're just in our head and we can't get out. And so, and watching the cooking channel, sitting in different place, sitting in a different chair, and just keep trying. Doesn't matter how. I remember I was taking a class down at Portland State. And that was another one of me trying. I got to do something. I got to try. I got to keep. I'm just not going to be this way. And but we were broke. I mean, we had no money. We were paying off our debt. We were broke. And I'd go up at lunchtime. They'd have meetings. Different groups would have meetings in different rooms, and oftentimes they'd uh, have pizza or have sandwiches or have other things. So I would time it so I would go up at the end of these groups, these meetings, and I would go in and I'd eat some leftover pizza or I'd eat a sandwich. And I knew I'd hit bottom when I went in one day. And the only thing left was a half eaten piece of pizza. And I picked it up and I ate it. And just really at that point, it struck me that, you know, um, yeah, yeah, that was a low point.
Well, Dave, I appreciate you so much for sharing this story with me and coming on here and sharing this impactful background about what you've done. I think a lot of people will resonate with it. If people would like to learn more about you and would like to maybe learn more information about the OMG That's Me series, or as well as just kind of keep up with you on social media, how can they reach you?
Well, there's two ways. I'm on LinkedIn and I respond to all my messages. So people reach me through that. Also, Facebook, people reach me through that. They message me there, and I answer. I respond to all the messages. The other thing to do is to for the books to is to go on Amazon. Just um, OMG, That's Me is in the bipolar category, is consistently in the top 10 of books sold in the bipolar disorder category. But go on to Amazon and look it up. You don't have to buy a book. I'm not here to sell books, but um, just to go on there and read about the books and maybe get an excerpt. You can do the same thing with the audiobooks. You can get an excerpt. Um, and just in doing that, that's healing. Just and I think things can't change. Things do change. And when I talk about suicide, and I can tell suicide jokes, but suicide is a permanent solution to a temporary problem. And it has a greater impact. You're not around anymore if you die from suicide, but your family, your kids, your wife, your parents, your cousins, your friends are significantly impacted in a negative way. So even though, it's I don't know how to say this except to say that it's kind of a selfish act because it relieves us of our challenges, but creates a lot of challenges for those we leave behind. And it's an example. My dad died from suicide, um, and easier. It made it easier for me to consider it as an option. I didn't do it. It didn't, but it made it easier. It made it, I considered it an option just because it was there and he had. And so that's what happens if you're a person with a family. Um, the impact on the kids. Not only are they going to miss you and live with the stigma from that, but it's also going to make it an option for them at some point in their life.
I'll put all of his links in the description box below about where you can find him and stay connected with him. So it's all in one place so that it's easy access for my listeners. To my everyone else, you can also follow me on social media as well. Instagram and TikTok at Lethal Venom Podcast, as well as Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube at Noah's Podcast. And also feel free to follow and listen to Lethal Venom wherever you get your podcast from. It's on all the major platforms: Spotify, Apple, Amazon, iHeartRadio, YouTube, and Pandora, as well as other platforms. So feel free to follow it so that you'll be notified of when new episodes come out. To all my listeners, thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode. I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Be safe, and I'll catch you on the next episode of Lethal Venom.